All right,
Um,
Ilya, Niraj,
yeah,
and Patrick, should we kick this off? I know we're a couple of minutes in. We don't want to keep everyone waiting, especially you two. Why don't we kick this off? Thank you so much, first of all, in advance for you folks for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Um, Obviously, there's been a lot happening in this space, and I think you folks are luminaries, builders, and have a lot of thoughts about what's happening here. So maybe we could do quick rapid fire introductions. And I know Patrick kind of looped you in last minute here, but why don't we start with Ilya? I don't think you need any introduction, but I think it'd be great for just to level set in terms of how how you got into the space, what you've been thinking about in the vein of decentralized AI, and we'll kick it off there and then hand it off to Niraj for some background.
sounds good. Yeah, I think I saw a really funny comment from my podcast at Lighthouse, which was how's Ilya has background in large, like 5 years or whatever, background in language models when they're only 2 years old. And yeah, I mean the background is obviously language models existed for like 60 years or 50 years. Large language models inside bigger companies have been around probably for seven, eight. And so, yeah, I was at Google Research working on kind of natural language understanding and co-author of the paper Attention is All You Need, which introduced transformer technology powering a lot of the large language model innovation that's happening now. And for me, I think the important piece and part of why I was very excited getting into blockchain space as well is I really believe in open source. I was back in Google, one of the major contributors to TensorFlow because I saw it as a kind of really important bridge between Google's kind of internal technology innovation and open source, like, and really getting a lot more developers in open source being able to build um, important kind of machine learning applications. And at the same time, I think from perspective of, if we think and we take an open source mindset, what we have right now is pretty much more and more big companies uh, kind of driving and like open sourcing pieces that they think is like strategic for them, but less and less in the uh, kind of general space because you need to have resources, you need to have kind of access, and you need to pay bills, and so big companies are the only one who can employ the people doing this. And so I see decentralized AI and kind of in general leveraging blockchain space and crypto as a way to counteract that, create communities and incentives for individual contributors and small teams and startups to really build together in the open, continue maintaining kind of this technology to be accessible to everyone, and at the same time, create enough incentive and value for people who are actually contributing.
Thanks, Ilya. Uh, Niraj, would love to hear some of your background and what got you excited about Ritual. I know some of the backstory, but I think everyone would love to hear this from you.
Yeah, and thanks for putting this together. I'm excited to have the discussion. So my background originally is in cryptography. Mainly did a lot of work with privacy systems around payments and smart contracts. In 2017, and where I've spent the majority of my career was as a VC at Polychain, where I focused across a bunch of different industries within crypto, but largely spent a lot of my time, excuse me, on infra. As I was looking through, what got me originally excited in investing in this space, I think one of the biggest things was crypto provided new tools for developers that were previously unavailable. You now had these kind of trustless platforms that allowed you to easily create innovations on top of other innovations, build new products, a whole new incentive mechanism, and all of this great cryptography underlying all of it. As I started exploring AI over the last couple of years, um, I think it really was the creation of LLMs and seeing how powerful they were in, I think, transforming me into seeing how AI could be very valuable and useful to the world. Um, AI has gone through many winters and summers over the past dozens of decades, and we've seen a bunch of AI crypto companies starting from 2017, but none of them really kind of took off at the time. And I think there's a bunch of different reasons for that, which we can go into later. But seeing the opportunity set of AI, but also the potential centralization risks, which we've seen in kind of traditional tech platforms, that brought a kind of an opportunity in my head of something that would be really valuable to build. And so started Ritual last year with we're now a team of 15 all around the world. The goal of Ritual is to make it really easy to connect smart contracts to AI models. And we really want to help grow the opportunity set of crypto adjacent and sort of AI enabled crypto applications in the ecosystem. And we're happy to have Anand as an investor and Illia as one of our advisors. So and again, thanks for setting this up, and I'm excited to chat.
Thanks, Niraj. We have Patrick as well from Van Eck. I think Patrick might be having some technical difficulties. Oh, Patrick, can you, I think you might now be a speaker, and if you are, let me give folks some background because he was a late ad, but his team put out a report yesterday at focused on this intersection, which I thought was very timely and topical, and we thought we'd have him on just to talk about the opportunity here. So maybe Patrick, a little bit of background, like how you started to put this report together, and any highlights that you want to discuss. But I think we will get into the meat of it during this chat. But maybe we can start with sort of what piqued your interest in wanting to explore this intersection.
Yeah. Hey, you can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Great. To me, like, there's been so much discussion about the intersection of crypto and AI for quite some time now, and lots of it seemed like fluff. And so, like, here, my job is to kind of figure out like which part of the markets and which tokens will go up. Like, that's my role as a research analyst, and it seemed that there might be some sort of narrative formation around that. Like, and so that's kind of where it started. So I started really diving deep in December, which of course does not compare to some of the more distinguished speakers here in terms of time spent on the topic. But we covered a lot of things, and I've thought about it pretty deeply about like the ways in which you can compare, and it kind of goes back to the basic principles of what crypto does. It's just open, transparent, immutable, and gives clear ownership properties. I think those things apply to AI, the models, the data themselves, and then other kinds of faucets to provide the ability to create those models and provide inference, use them, whatever. I think just makes a ton of sense. That's kind of how I went about this from an investment standpoint, and then I just thought a lot about the idea of what comes next.
Awesome. Patrick, thanks for joining us. As both Niraj and Ilya have been looking into this space, either from an academic standpoint or obviously professionally for quite some time, and Niraj has got a great lens, both as an investor and as a builder. I want to dive into the thick of it. Our hope is that we can do this on an ongoing basis. There's a lot to unpack here. There's some really cool people building some really cool shit. And I'm hoping that we can do this on an ongoing basis and really start to unpack more about what's exciting. But maybe for starters, Niraj, I'd love to get your thoughts. I know you and I have chatted about this. It's coming up on maybe almost a year now on the thesis behind decentralized AI and what you saw as sort of the opportunity set. And there were some things that you said, and I don't want to take the thunder away from you, but that really stood out to me in terms of like both timing and how you were sort of uniquely positioned in some ways given your your vantage point as an investor, but also having done research in this area before that made you want to pursue this. It was like a now or never thing that you sort of alluded to. There was this interesting time pressure, but I guess more sort of from an ethos perspective, right? Like what does this mean to you? What does decentralized AI mean to you? Why is it important? why should we all care? Why, for all those people listening? And what were the things that clicked for you when you were like, this is where I want to invest my career? Because you could be doing anything, Raj. You're so talented. Like, why did you decide to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the ethos of, I think, what this space provides, maybe to just zoom out and cover I think the properties of crypto, what crypto brings to the world, and then what AI separately brings to the world. Crypto to me largely is a tool for self-sovereignty. So as we've seen, everything in the world tends towards centralization. That's just how it happens. Capital, sort of social things, etc. And crypto is really the tool in our toolbox to allow for self-sovereignty again. And so we get all of these great properties from that: privacy, computational integrity, censorship resistance. And then to kind of take where AI is, I think especially post LLMs, an analogy I like to use is, for the last 50, 60 years that we've had computers, and probably a little longer, we've had to talk to computers with code. That's how we interacted with computers. And now computers can interact back to us in human language, which is a really, really powerful mechanism that is sort of a recent innovation. I remember, learning about LLMs, and it kind of had a moment, or I kind of had a moment that was like when I first saw Bitcoin. It felt like almost this divine creation of something like unique and interesting that was getting created. So where do these things intersect, and why is this interesting, and why did I decide to go do something here? This to me is one of the biggest opportunity sets in the crypto space broadly. Um, in the ways that crypto can help AI, as I mentioned before, AI is starting to centralize in a big way, as things tend to do. There's a couple of big model providers. There's a couple of cloud storage provider, or cloud providers, whether for storage or for compute. And that is a problem once these LLMs are starting to be used in everything around the world, all of the products and devices. And we saw with the OpenAI fiasco a few months ago, just a few people are already kind of controlling the fate of one of the biggest and most important private companies in the world. So where I think crypto can be really valuable to AI is giving these self-sovereignty guarantees to AI, bringing privacy back, bringing control and sort of open governance back, building or bringing sort of computational integrity back. And then to quickly bring up the other side, how does AI help crypto? Given these properties of AI being this tool for improving the way that we can interface with computers, and providing this kind of new statistical computer, you could call it, there are a number of different areas within crypto that are really exciting that can be further improved with AI. Whether that's governance and improving the governance processes of DeFi or of DAOs, doing media generation, whether it's audio, video, really whatever modality you may want, all the way to things like gaming. Being able to create more custom experiences to the users that are actually using them. So what fascinated me most about getting into the space, and why I wanted to, is part of my MO at Polychain was trying to figure out what developers in crypto would be building in over the next few years. And crypto AI feels like that asymmetric upside opportunity to build in. And I ultimately am very passionate about bringing tons of users to crypto. And we've seen ChatGPT get hundreds of millions of users in a matter of a few months. We can bring that to crypto. That is there. I think we really just have to build the right tooling, and also show developers how to build it. So that's kind of my general kind of high level thesis on the space, and where I see some interesting opportunities.
Awesome. Thanks, Raj. a lot, a lot to unpack there. But Ilya, I think you've been spending time here more than most, and yeah, would love to hear sort of having spent time at Google, coming at this from a vantage point of being in a company that's putting out products that are necessarily centralized in nature from an AI perspective. Curious, like what motivates you? What's driving you today? And maybe one other sort of sub question here, which is Niraj was talking about some utility and obviously the ability to bring hundreds of millions of users. I saw you nodding your head as he said that. I would love to hear sort of your thoughts there
Billions.
as well. Yeah, how do we make that happen with the focus on this intersection, because it is definitely promising.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack for sure, and Niraj gave a good like motivation here in general. I mean, for me, I mentioned, right, I do believe, I mean, there's like a core set of beliefs, right? So sovereignty is probably one that we all share being in blockchain space. I actually put out a kind of more detailed blog around like kind of self-sovereignty, full sovereignty, which includes kind of AI, like your data, which in a sense, related to AI, related to experiences you build. And so really interconnecting that. And kind of within that, I think that capabilities like this, think of this more as a tool, right? This capability should be accessible to everyone and should be in service of each individual, right? And so this is like applying self-sovereignty mindset to AI. And to achieve that, you cannot have a single company that has kind of due to network effects and data mode controls pretty much everybody's access to intelligence, right? Because they will naturally, however good the people are, they will naturally need to censor because they need to comply with different regulations across different areas. They will naturally will need to kind of limit things, but also it opens up. If you want to lower the prices, you can. I started talking about this. I have this sometimes feeling where like maybe I should not tell people like bad ideas of how to like manipulate people, but I'm assuming anybody can figure out these things. But if you want to run right now this AI, chat startup, the what would make sense is to offer it for free and then run on every single token a auction, an ad auction, which sells it to the highest bidder. What this allows you to do now is, like mostly it will be generated based on the top token, but sometimes it will change it, when it's like mentioning a product, it will change it. When it's mentioning, which president you should vote for, it maybe shifts it, right? Based on the auctions. And so this creates like a, best opportunity to manipulate people. But for a business that builds it, it's highly like it's very much something on their like clear business line because it creates a ton of revenue and they can offer now their product for free. And like I mean that's kind of how Google was built, right? But like in this case, you wouldn't even say that you ran the ad because you just ran it. Like nobody knows which model you ran. Um, and so I think that's an extremely kind of scary reality that we're going to get into because, I mean, these things are expensive to run. And so anything that will, reduce the cost or potentially makes you revenue is something worth doing for a startup. And in turn, that means like that we cannot believe these tools, right? They're not actually on our side. They're not producing the output that kind of statistical model gave you. It actually produces a highly biased output based on a bunch of criteria. So that is what motivated me. That's why I was excited about Ritual. Because like we need provable compute, we need way to provably verify that the output I'm getting is indeed from this model, not just from whatever somebody like Elsa can write an if statement and if you're from Van Eyck, then output that you guys should buy all those tokens, right? So like you don't know, what the output you're getting. So that's a really big motivation for me. And so kind of turning this to the user side, um, I I think important part is kind of the self, like we want to get billions of people self sovereignty, right? I mean, which means like they should have a blockchain account, etc. But like at the end, they should have self-sovereignty. And I think so far we haven't had really good examples of value, self-sovereignty value that people can benefit from. It's mostly being, ape into this token or, swap this token or really good, GIF picture that you can put on your profile. And I think like private data, being able to kind of use it on your, like use it kind of this language models on your data without this data leaving your devices, without needing to kind of give up all your privacy to some company. And right now there's like a bunch of startups actually that offering this, which is like, hey, give me all your data and I'll build your personal LLM. And that's like even scarier because like at least with Google, you assume some level of private data privacy protection, all those things. With a startup, I mean, I built a startup, right? You're just hacking things together initially, and so like you have no idea how it's going to get hacked tomorrow to get all the private data out. So we need this kind of offering that is way more robust, but also it creates new opportunity. Right now, I can sell maybe some of my data on the data market for people to train better models, right? So I can make more money. I can have a model that like votes on my behalf in a bunch of elections and on-chain governance. So I don't need to like waste time on that. I just need to tell my model, answer a few questions, and now have enough context to do this. So for me, like it's a new opportunity, a new tool set, but also like wearing self-sovereignty hat is like really important to deliver something that is not manipulating, that is really on your side, and that provides you new economic opportunities.
Thanks, Ilya. Very helpful. As you were speaking, I was thinking, when you started talking, I was like, when do we pull the Google out of Ilya? And then you landed the plane. So I'm glad it happened. Patrick, I saw we're all on a Zoom together at the same time. Patrick, I saw you might be raising your eyebrows at some of these. Did you have anything to add there? What do you think?
No, I was just working through like what's the so what for me, and like I come into
Mm.
this process as somewhat of a child who wanders into a movie halfway through, right? That's a Big Lebowski quote for you. And I typically come in with a really simple approach, a very left color of understanding of what's going on and why. And then unfortunately, I start gathering enough information to become mid-curve informed. And then typically I use those learnings to go back to the left curve and then justify them using mid-curve explanations. But like the key things to me about AI models is that you want to know like who built the model, like is it good, and where is that data from? And to me, like the ideal environment to have those ownership properties and those proving properties and a place to host those proofs would be blockchain. And that's kind of like my a really simple way of looking at this and why I think it's a really good nexus of crypto and AI.
Yep, I think we're aligned. So for sure, that makes sense. Um, Niraj, I wanted to pick up on the high level goal, right? Like your motivation, getting seeing the spike and the rate at which ChatGPT grew, and the number of users they were able to amass, and your desire to want to do something similar for which can propel utility for the blockchain as well. What are some areas did you think are sort of ripe for the picking today? Obviously, there's Ilya was talking about the concept of like, data marketplaces, data lockers, and that starts at the lowest layers. And then obviously there's incumbent solutions on chain, DeFi, NFTs that could leverage AI. But what does that path look like for you in Ritual? Like how do you start to get to that point where it feels like, a user is using some of these primitives without really maybe knowing that they're using blockchain primitives here, and where AI is serving purpose for them. So I'm just curious, like, where do you see the lowest hanging fruit today, but at steady state, where do you see things happening?
So a good frame of reference I like to use, I think I might have mentioned earlier, is if we take and we're just talking, I mean, let's just talk about LLMs for a second. What do those provide the world? It provides this new human interface into using a computer. It's able to summarize information in a bunch of different ways, and it's able to understand our intent and what we're trying to do with certain things. And so I think one of the challenges this space will face, and we've seen it a little bit historically, is that the number of crypto people that also understand AI, even at a kind of 101 level, is low. And I think we need to push that further. Because I think once you understand a basic bit of both, then there starts to be some interesting intersections. So thinking through what has worked in the Web 2 AI world, and even just naively copying those things over. Um, so for in Ilya's example, imagine you had your own sort of self-sovereign identity with your data that's portable and encrypted and stored on a blockchain or off chain. Imagine you could build a personal agent or personal assistant that is able to now plug into your different dApps and execute things on your behalf. It can start suggesting you things. Hey, you typically claim this token from this network around this time, or hey, your tokens are unlocking here, or hey, there's this asset that you really like. You should go do this trade. Basically, being able to supercharge the what today is a very manual experience. And I think thinking through being able to provide recommendations, being able to act on the behalf of users, is a very, very big opportunity set to be able to do. And then this is not to mention diffusion models, now being able to do media generation. Imagine that you could build, an NFT marketplace where all of the content is sort of autonomously generated. You build NFTs around it, and then you can, offer those for sale. It it really brings down the barrier to entry of creativity. And I think thinking in this sort of vein, I think helps conjure up a lot of really interesting ideas. And this is not to mention other ideas that other folks have mentioned on the call so far. Like DeFi, for example. There's tons of sort of immediate use cases with fairly low lift, and not super complex models that you could build. So my mo with Ritual, and I think with the space broadly, is let's get people really educated about ML and crypto, and then the intersection. And once I think you have those frameworks in place, people will start coming up with weird shit all the time. I remember it's kind of like 2017. Um, Ethereum had smart contracts. The only thing people were using smart contracts for was to do ICOs. And then over the next coming years, we saw Compound, we saw DYDX, we saw Uniswap, and those were just independent creations in many ways. So I'm really looking forward to that moment in this space when people just start coming up with stuff independently. But it obviously requires a little bit of starter energy to show what is possible on chain.
Super well said. Yeah, I think the talent piece is fascinating, and I think Ilya, with your work and the Near team and Ritual, it feels like there's going to be a beautiful sandbox to kind of build on top of. And yeah, I've held the idea or notion that I think what DeFi did for blockchains around the circa the time that you were talking about, Niraj, 2017, 2018, I feel like AI could be that catalyst to boost our TAM for crypto as we look forward. So excited about this and excited for more talent to come in and build as well. To keep the train on the tracks, I'd love maybe to segue a little bit, like to unpack this a little bit more. You're right, like you're creating this sandbox, this playground. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how Ritual might be facilitating that? Like I know you've got some opinions on this, but if a builder wants to get started and wants to start tinkering, like where do they go? What do they do today with Ritual?
So the ultimate goal of what we're trying to build is act as a conduit between AI models and crypto systems. So the first thing that we've released that people can play around with and use to start building applications is called Infernet. It's kind of like internet with an F. So the best place to learn more about this is ritual.net/product, and it has this kind of crazy sort of schizo diagram we put together of all the different pieces of the eventual system. But if you scroll down, there is an explanation on what Infernet is. And the basic idea of Infernet is we're coming from the frame of how do we start getting people to use AI on chain today. And we've taken some steps where, maybe it's not the most secure, perhaps, or perhaps, it's kind of only so far complete, but not fully complete. And what Infranet does is it's an off-chain compute network. You could think of it kind of like a chain link. And what it does is from, say, from an Ethereum contract, there is a Solidity SDK that we have put together called Infranet SDK that is able to go and dispatch calls out to the Infranet network, which anyone can go and start playing around with. You can set up a node fairly easily, and that system is called it's Infranet node or the Infranet system. And so a smart contract developer can say, hey, I want to build a chat app. Maybe it's a mostly off-chain chat app, but maybe there are some pieces that you want to, interact with on-chain. So it can say, hey, I want Llama 2. These are the features I want, and perhaps you want to fine-tune it, and here are the inputs that I want from the user. It's able to dispatch it. The network takes care of all of the, compute fulfillment tasks that you typically would need to do, and then returns the result back. So this is kind of what we've built so far that people can start playing around with. And we actually, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, also released a whole library of potential, or I should say, implementations on Infranet that you can play around with and build an
Niraj,
application
you
on
said
top.
this is like a trust system, correct? That you're trusting like nodes or a consensus amongst those nodes. Is that the way to understand this?
Yes. So this network is not fully decentralized yet, but it will be in the future. The things that you can do, I'll go into a potential application, and then I'll explain where the proofs come in. One of the applications we built is called FriendRug. It was a sample application we released about 2 months ago. The basic idea with FriendRug is it's a friend tech room that this bot is the one that's responding to back and forth from requests. It's a popular open source LLM that we've put a bunch of examples into to kind of have it be a little bit harder to answer queries. And basically, the goal of what you're trying to do with FriendRug is you're trying to convince the bot to buy your friend tech keys. So you can come up with different ways, different methods of doing that. And the app, the benefit, or I guess the purpose for doing that was to show how you can use these non-deterministic LLMs to come up with a little bit of stochasticity, you could say. Feeds it into a classifier that's on chain with ZKML proof, and then you're able to go and actually use the application. So we'd like to see a bunch more things like that. I think there's a lot of excitement about agents, and that's one application we put out to sort of show that. So that's one way that developers can build with AI crypto today inside of their applications.
Awesome, thank you. By the way, for folks listening, if you have questions for Illia, Niraj, or Patrick, please just at message me. We'll make sure to. I don't. My voice is not the most pleasant to listen to this whole time. So please feel free to hit me up, and I'll make sure to unmute you, and maybe you can ask questions directly to the speakers as well. Just kind of piggybacking off of what Niraj said, Ilya, curious, like when you think about, I guess, in my head, there's like this 2x2, like this decentralized, centralized, there's open source and not open source. And, what do you really care about, and how far does, where does decentralization need to go in your opinion? At steady state, is everything decentralized? Is everything open source for you, in your mind? Or, do you feel like there's some compromise here at varying points of the stack? And I'm just kind of still riffing off of what you were saying as far as like data, for example, goes, and sovereignty, and providing infrastructure at those layers versus something that's further up stack. And curious how you might sort of parse that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like different use cases and different kind of parts that require different trade-off here. So like, for example, you wouldn't want your private data to be open source. at the same time, you want to have like a decentralized replication for your private data that's encrypted, such that like Amazon cannot just say like tomorrow you boot it out, or Dropbox can like boot you out right from your Dropbox. Also, they don't not. I mean, sometimes they encrypt, sometimes they don't, right? So that's kind of the framework there is like what makes sense. I think the kind of for decentralization in AI, right? I think where it does make sense is when you want smart contract to be an actor, right? You want either like have some money on smart contract, have multiple people interacting with it, have some form of activity that will be on chain. And for that, you want to have a decentralized model with some way of proving that indeed decentralized inference for a model, with some way that proves that the output came to the blockchain smart contract such that you can act on behalf of this. On the flip side, if I'm running something like on my own data, I might as well just run it on my device, right? And this is where we've been experimenting with some edge models and kind of been doing this edge intelligence summit last year. And so like I think a lot of it will also bifurcate there, because already you can run, like I have a Mistral model 7B on my laptop, and I kind of use it from time to time. The Mixtral, I could run it on my M2. I wouldn't say it's like performant, the mixture of experts, but like as compute becomes better, right, the models also as they become smaller are like more intelligent for the same parameters. We'll see kind of improvement there. So I think like there's kind of the like 2x2 there as well, which is like, is this data private? Is there some shared state that you're interacting with or not, right? Data private or not. So those kind of the decision where it's like, I want it local, but open source, I want it decentralized. That's kind of how you make those decisions. And then probably the other important piece is, right now at least, right, decentralized comes with a lot of overhead. And so understanding when this overhead is reasonable versus when not is also important. And also, some people right now, for example, use Akash, which is, a compute network. You can go and just like get, they have few A100s on Akash. And so you can kind of use it from there, but you don't come with any proofs, right? And so you don't know if they actually run it, the model you asked, or it can be run by something else was run. And again, it maybe matters and maybe not, right? That's kind of really depends on the use case as well. So those are kind of really decision criteria that you need to be operating under. For anything that's like financial, right? If you want a smart contract making decisions, you want, provable, you want it to be like verifiable, you want to make sure that the model came from a trusted source as well. I think going down the pipeline, and this is where, I think in blockchain, we kind of care about this like inference part. In AI, actually, people care about the data model training regime, like those pieces as well. And this is where it becomes really complicated, because right now, actually, people compete on how clean the data set they have. What types of copyright the data that went into it, and who they want and don't want to tell about it, right? Like there's a whole like slew of problems there that goes into like if some of the startups right now that have pretty good performing models, potentially if they open source their data set, they may get in trouble, right? So like that's gets into like complicated question of, well, is copyright even make sense in the new world of generative kind of language and images, right? And I would actually argue it doesn't, because we can just generate a bunch of possible text and then say everybody else is violating our copyright. So
Synthetic data. Mm-hmm.
So I think there's like pieces there that are interesting that like we also need to keep track, because again, to not give somebody an idea, but I'm pretty sure somebody's already doing it. If you want to change how people will think in a year from now, the way to do this is to start infiltrating forums on the internet with content, just like by posting stuff, because this will then be scraped, put into training data, and train AI models in a year from now. And this AI models will be highly biased based on whatever data you put in right now. Hopefully, again, I'm not opening America here, but this is like the best way to start influencing hundreds of millions of people right now. That's like very, very hard to navigate, very hard to remove, right? And like literally just post, like, go to all the forums and post whatever like types of text you want, the ways people should be thinking. And you can use actually current chat GPT to like prepare the text for that and make them, discrepant. So like, that is really important part, because like whatever that goes into training data, that creates biases in all these models that then comes out when you're actually asking stuff. And so that's where, like, I would say importance across especially security and alignment will be. And again, blockchain can be a helpful tool here, but there's some pieces that we really need to figure out for that to happen.
Yep. Yeah, I think you just described the reviews section of every Amazon product listing or comments on YouTube or Reddit. Sadly, for better or for worse. One thing that Niraj mentioned, which is talking about talent, and the second thing is, the rapid pace with which a centralized company like OpenAI was able to move, and we're at this point today. Like, I'm going to date myself here. I took my first AI related programming class back in 1999. We were taught this thing called Lisp, which was supposed to be the thing that unlocked AI, but obviously it was way too early, right? There was not enough data for AI to make sense. And then to your point, Ilya, we were able to scrape large amounts of data and get this far really fast. And so marrying a couple of things: talent, data, and the fact that today, when we think about decentralization, inherently there's a few issues that come up, right? There's some trade-offs that we made along the way. So, for example, when it comes to blockchains, we talk about the trilemma. Um, and so when I think about speed and I think about talent, I feel like data is now, to your point, Ilya, is like, it feels like it's this remarkable problem. We've kind of almost were there to the point where either it's synthetic or it's real, and we've got this data to work off of. But what are, in your mind, when you think about what could impede decentralized AI, or what are some trade-offs that builders might have to consider when they're entering the space? What is that, in your opinion? Is it latency? Is it too much decent? To your point, like, you don't want to open source your data, right? Like, that's it. Are there any such trade-offs that come to mind? And open to any of you, by the way, Patrick, Niraj, or Ilya, feel free to jump in. But I'm curious, what should we be considering, and what are some pitfalls that we're not sort of thinking about yet?
I would just start with the obvious one, which is compute. I mean, the reason OpenAI is so ahead of the game is because they got their hands on a ton of compute. I mean, this is saying from somebody who was doing very much the same things as a startup, which had like 700K funding. We could not afford building out clusters of GPUs that didn't even exist back then. And so I think the general story and right now is that kind of in open source world, and even in like smaller startups, there's pretty much lack of access to compute, and so they need to rely on the APIs that are provided by Google and OpenAI. Or interestingly, kind of Meta became this new hero, which open sourced like a model that they trained on massive compute, and that not everybody can now fine tune and play around. But if you are, talking about kind of lowering barrier, right? Compute being the probably most complex things to get hands on, and when we're talking about also like production usage, it's just expensive, right? Some of these queries, they literally cost cents per query at the end, and so if you have a user who sends like 10, 20, 30 queries per day, that's like a not significant price to actually for interaction. So I think like that's kind of generally like that's not a problem of decentralization, it's just general problem with current language models. This is where, at least from my perspective, the edge compute comes in really interestingly, because, well, if you can use your own hardware and everybody just uses their own hardware, then, well, great. That's removes both centralization points, and kind of doesn't require the companies that are building products to be responsible and have huge costs. And so we just really need to like make the model smaller. But making model smaller itself requires, you know, a lot of experimentation and innovation, and that requires a lot of compute. So I think there's kind of that interesting trade-off. But you know, hopefully as time progresses, like I, for example, testing out actually new service that uses like custom chips. Like there's a lot of cool stuff coming out around that to lift at least partially this challenge.
All right. You teasing a little bit there, Ilya, but would love to hear more about this, the hardware and chips, maybe at a later time. Turn it over to you, Niraj. Curious if you know, any trade-offs that you feel that you've started to encounter as you're building Ritual. And then Patrick, I have some questions for you as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a few. There's one is the limitations of the cryptography that's being used to garner some of these guarantees. So the holy grail is still privacy, which you can't really use a lot of the existing techniques that you have available to you because you know you're trying to compute on private data, which is sort of one of the you know hardest problems in privacy. So that's to me that's you know more of a time thing than anything. Now that we have a bunch of companies that are excited about crypto AI, I imagine we'll start to see more investment into this area. Um, Very similarly to what we saw from you know call it 2016 to you know now 2024 in the ZKP space. You know, generating a Zcash transaction used to take you know minutes and minutes and minutes, and now you're able to put you know whole VMs into snarks and prove them in a relatively efficient time period. So these things have accelerated quite a lot, and you know, Ilya sort of mentioned hardware. A lot of the math that's being done in you know AI compute is very similar to the math that's being done in say a ZKP to actually do the proof generation. So we'll also be able to mirror some of the techniques that we have from there. There's certain techniques that we need to bring into the crypto world, you know, namely, you know, going from floating point math to fixed point math so that it's cryptography efficient. So that's one whole big area that I'd love to see some more development in, and you know, we're trying our hardest to try to accelerate this. I'd say the other limitations, you know, largely lie around the semantics of what the AI is actually doing. So I think Vitalik summed up the different parts of where crypto and AI can intersect in a really interesting way. He took it in sort of a more of a high level kind of philosophical manner in relation to you know the game he calls it, and I think thinking through the different semantics of how these things interact is a big challenge and something we have to think through more. There are pieces of how much does computational integrity actually matter for various use cases. Maybe for having, you know, doing recommendation systems for social, you know, you want weak computational integrity, but it doesn't need to be, you know, zkML or something like that. But maybe if you have an ML controller inside of a DeFi protocol, you may want that to be zkML. You don't want any kind of lack of finality or potential ability to dispute. So I think we're starting to grow up in the sense that we've gone from like crypto AI is really interesting. Now we're starting to encounter the initial technical problems and also what are the most interesting use cases. And a big question I think about a lot is, you know, what will be the first crypto AI thing that gets to, you know, 100,000 users and then 1 million users? And some of them may be more in the background, like you might just be playing a game and it happens to use AI, or it might be something, you know, right in your face, and you know, maybe it's more of a chat-like experience. So these are, you know, this is not all of the things that I'm thinking about, but these are just a few that I think are important as we're in this development of the space.
Thanks, Niraj. I think you know, with Infernet, you've kind of created the sandbox, and I think I recall Chris Dixon's blog post from 2010 when he says, you know, the next big thing will start out looking like a toy, and so I think you start to experiment and create things which will eventually find, utility or become mainstream. And so, yeah, excited to get this for people to start tinkering and building things. I think that's incumbent upon us. We have about 8 minutes left. I want to be mindful of your time. Again, folks, if you have any questions for these fine gentlemen, please hit us up on Twitter. We'll be sure to answer that. But I thought for the next few minutes, we could just talk about the report that Patrick and his colleagues put out. And any summary you can provide, Patrick, any background would be super helpful. But I think one of my takeaways, and I'm curious to hear everyone's opinion on this, was the forecast, the AI crypto projects, which will do roughly 10 billion in revenue by 2030, and what that really means. And I think we all have different ways of interpreting that. And I think someone messaged me and said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And my instinctive reaction was, I think these forecasts are utility driven, which is actually promising. The fact that we have a forecast is really promising, although I think it might be an order of magnitude lower than where we might be in 2030. But I don't want to influence anyone's opinion here. But Patrick, I'll turn it over to you, maybe to share a little bit about the report, and then would love for Ilya and Niraj to chime in and add their thoughts.
Yeah, the first idea was just like ballparking what that market might be, and working through some sell side analyst stuff and reading through information myself, it became pretty clear that like the clearest pathway to understanding what monetization might look like and what that market might look like was just saying, okay, like what are the productivity gains, like, or the losses and costs, right? And so that's kind of difficult. And so there's some pretty good analysis of precisely which jobs will be impacted and why and how they will be. And there's some just really broad estimates. And so like it's really hard to take that and triangulate to anything super meaningful. So take those numbers with a grain of salt, as Anand has mentioned. And so the idea is like, okay, like once we understand, like, okay, well, what are the productivity gains, the next step sort of thing, okay, like how much of that productivity could be captured by enterprise software, right? Or sorry, how much of that productivity gains could be captured amongst the different branches of AI? So you think everything from building the hardware to writing the software to all the different facets of supporting it, and like AI infrastructure as a service. The idea was basically like, okay, like let's assume that software is going to be the most value added. It's going to be the most interesting. It'll capture the most of that stack. And then so working from there, the next step is say, okay, like of that, like what can software companies extract from enterprises? So there's a bunch of different examples like that you have right now for everything from Microsoft Office to accounting software. And you say, okay, like what amount of productivity gains or costs do these things save and what are they taking? And so general estimates would range between like 3 to 30%. And so ballparking that's kind of like how we came up with this like software TAM. With the other ones, like there's a sense that there's a little bit of arbitrariness to like the numbers we chose, but it was just kind of like to get an idea out there, like, hey, there's like this nexus. And so the nexus kind of explain, okay, like there's this market size that you could take, how is it going to take it? And then so you see like the current projects that are doing it. There's GPU provision, there's building AI models, having marketplaces for those models, and then also data marketplaces as well. And then finally having the ability to train and supposedly fine tune those models. Something like BitTensor, I think, is like the one that's pretty unique in that capacity. And so that's just kind of like gist of it. It's like, okay, like here's what we have today, here's the potential of the future. I think the most interesting thing, the takeaway from this report is again like the basic principles, like, hey, I want to prove something happened, right? So it's like in blockchain and crypto, what are the ways in which you do that? Like, what are the ways you take data that's not on chain and bring it on chain? So you have maybe a consensus of off chain nodes, maybe you have a like trust network, like a chain link. Maybe you have like economic value backing truth, like maybe like an eigenlayer or a Babylon, something along those lines. And then finally, you have like cryptography. And in this case, it'd be like, ZK ML or ZK or whatever there might be to prove your mathematics. And so like thinking through those, like the most obvious clear use case to me comes from this proliferation of on-chain dexes that run off-chain order books. And so like the most obvious one for that is DYDX. DYDX, right? Each validator instance runs its own order book off-chain. And so you have to say to yourself, okay, how do you know that there's like fairness in the way in which they're structuring fills, in which the way in which they're ordering transactions? And so there's an entity called Skip that's supposed to monitor them, and the social consensus for slashing them. But there's no way to prove like, okay, what they saw was correct, accurate, fair, and there was no coordination between validators. So like logically, you could run some sort of like AI compute that says like, hey, this mathematical computation was fair. And on top of it, maybe you can even like look for nefarious actions by those validator sets, like ways of extracting MEV in order books that only some people have like talked about in theory and not seen in practice. Obviously, like those AI models would have to see those things and would probably be open to novel attacks that they haven't seen before. But the premise is there. Like when I go to like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, I trust that the fill algorithm that it says works accordingly. And then the whole structure of how I get filled, when I submit my order to the time it gets filled and then sent back to me, like works as promised. And so you have that and you just trust that. But for like a DYDX and some of these off-chain order books, you don't have that. You don't have a clear understanding of how the fill algorithm works. You don't understand if it was fair. And then having the ability to prove that fairness, I think would be a really powerful immediate property that like AI compared like combined with like zkML or some sort of like proof system can give to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Wow, that's very practical utility. You went all the way from like, computes portion of the stack, which you cover in your report, all the way to like practical use cases. So I really appreciate that. I know we're coming up on the last minute here. I wanted to give the floor back to Illia and Niraj. I know Illia has been working on some things on the edge, and there's a summit coming up at ETH Denver, among other things. Niraj is going to be at ETH Denver as well. So I just want to turn it over to you folks. Any call to actions, anything that you recommend our listeners pay attention to, or other areas in which we can tune in? And very quickly, whether Ilya or Niraj like this or not, I've kind of recruited them to do this every couple of weeks. I don't know if they'll sign up for it, but my hope is to just unpack this category a lot more. And I think to Niraj's point, get more talent building into this space. So, but yeah, so tune in maybe every other Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific is the goal. But Ilya, Edge Summit or other things where people can find you or learn more in the next few weeks, months?
Yeah, so we have a hackathon in Denver. It's called Autonomous Agent. It's attracting folks to really dive in and like hack some things, as Niraj pointed out. Just like let's get some people hacking, let's get some use cases going, and then see what really works. So we have this opportunity at Denver, February 26, 27. I'll be speaking there as well as folks from Polygon and others coming in as well. And then there's AGI Day and kind of Decentralized AI Day on 28th, where Niraj and I are also speaking. So kind of inviting people to join or tune in. And yeah, I mean, we'll be continue doing this one way or another, as well as there's like a project I'm contributing, which I'll be rolling out, talking about a little bit later in a week or two in this space.
Lovely. And Niraj will find you in Denver as well, yeah, at ETH Denver.
Yeah, get used to all of our voices because you're going to be hearing them a lot more in Denver. Yes, we'll be doing a couple of talks and panels and workshops and a bunch of other stuff. So excited for that. And yeah, if there are any questions on what we're building, we're on Twitter at RitualNet, or ritual.net is our website. And yeah, excited to see what questions people have and what people build.
Thank you all so much. I want to be mindful of your time. We budgeted an hour and we're slightly over. Really, really appreciate this. And yeah, let's keep doing more of this and unpack this category more. But more than anything else, super appreciative to both of you who've been thinking about this. And I loved, Niraj, your comment about how thinking about the next hundreds of millions of users who might come on chain because there's an alternative to centralized AI and how that could boost crypto TAM across the board, but also provide super awesome utility that's comparable to what we'd find in a centralized environment. So thank you all again so much, Patrick. I know this is a last minute ad for you, but thank you for making it. And yeah, we'll catch you all again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.